Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay. If you can't, just yell, and I can figure it out. So here's Harald Szeemann. This is also Harald Szeemann. Here, more at the beginning of his career. These photos were taken during Documenta 5 in 1972. So what I'm talking about tonight, I'm going to talk briefly in very broad terms about these two exhibitions that are touring right now and currently at the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf. And then I'm going to talk in much more detail about just one Harald Szeemann exhibition, the Grandfather exhibition, which we have done as a reconstruction. But here, just to give you a little preview, if you want to go to Düsseldorf, this is the Museum of Obsessions exhibition currently on view, a retrospective of a curator. So we don't have a lot of models for how one makes an exhibition about an exhibition maker. That's been one of the challenges for this project. This first section called 8.5 Years, which looks at his time at the Kunsthalle Berne, and here on the left wall you see all of the many posters from his time there. A section of the show called Avant-Gardes, looking at three of, in my opinion, his most important early exhibitions, When Attitudes Become Form in 1969, Happening and Fluxus, a survey of performance art from 1970, Documenta 5 in 1972. So we have material showing the exhibitions, we have artworks that were in the exhibitions, we have interviews with people talking about the projects so that you can get some sense of what the projects were. And I only have aerial views here, but then moving to a section called Utopias and Visionaries, which looks at this amazing trilogy of projects that Szeemann spent 10 years working on, the Bachelor machines in the mid-1970s, this survey of a turn to the machine aesthetic that he saw happening in the modernism of the late 19th century and early 20th century, then looking at the utopian communities that formed around Monte Verita in the south of Switzerland, beginning in the 1870s. And then finally, the Gesamtkunstwerk exhibition from 1983, a massive visionary survey of this complicated notion of the total work of art. And here we have some of the models that he had commissioned to be made for these exhibitions. On the left wall there, a large installation of the untaught, not really artist, Armand Schultes, a hermit that had been living on his own mountain in Switzerland. So looking at these different sides of Szeemann and in switching from the avant-gardes, these early shows like Attitudes, to these later shows like Gesamtkunstwerk, there's a huge change that happens in Szeemann's work. He moves from being very focused on the contemporary and art that's happening right now, and instead he takes this sweeping, very thematic step back, and he starts introducing a lot more non-art material, furniture, popular cultural material, looking to literature, looking to philosophy. So there are these two sides to Szeemann in a way. So here, the most famous exhibition, When Attitudes Become Form. For many of us, this is the Szeemann that we might know, this incredible, one of the first exhibitions in the late 1960s, trying to look simultaneously at what was happening in both Northern and Southern Europe and on both the East and West coasts of the United States. And it was an exhibition that led to his leaving the Kunsthalle Berne, in part because the pieces, so many of them took the building as a site in ways that were a bit violent. Here we have Richard Serra splashing several hundred pounds of molten lead into the corners. Lawrence Weiner making a wall removal piece. If you go to the Kunsthalle de Berne today, you can still see the scars of this piece. They never patched it up exactly, so the ghost of that piece is sort of still there. Joseph Beuys spreading 400 pounds of margarine in the corners. Most famously, I think, Michael Heiser. This is the Berne Depression piece where he smashed the plaza in front of the Kunsthalle, really to the horror of the Berne City Council. This piece by Robert Morris, this was a piece where every day you add more oil-soaked rags and flammable materials to a pile in the middle of the floor. And the idea was that you would then, at the end of the show, take it outside and burn it. But look at this photograph. Every single person in this photograph is smoking right in front of the piece. So that's one Szeemann that we might know, this kind of radical early version. Closer to our own time, the later Szeemann, these vast thematic exhibitions, Austria in a Net of Roses, this incredible mixing of materials from different genres, working with really heavy designing his own wallpapers and things like that. Or we might think of him as the great curator of biennales around the world. Here from the Venice Biennale in 2001, which he called the Plateau of Humankind. Here's another example. Or these sort of crazy exhibitions, Money and Value, The Last Taboo in 2002, where in addition to having so many artworks, he has things like the old safety deposit boxes from Swiss banks, all of these kind of thematic additions. So how did he get to that point, I guess? Moving from really being someone totally engaged with the art of his time to being someone that took a much more multiple approach and much more mixed in what he was doing. I think that there's an exhibition, a little-known exhibition in 1974 that he did that in a way is the answer to this. It's an exhibition called Grandfather, A Pioneer Like Us. It's an exhibition that he did in his own apartment. And at a time, he did this shortly after Documenta 5. After Documenta 5, there had been huge controversy. The show was, terribly received, actually. Now we look at it as the best documenta that ever happened, but that was not the view in 1972. He had this period of a couple years where he really could not get work. He had no projects coming up. And the Grandfather exhibition grew out of that time. He made a show about his own grandfather. Szeemann's father and grandfather were both hairdressers. The grandfather invented a version of the permanent wave. And the grandfather had recently died. He was in his 90s. Szeemann took more than 1,200 objects from the grandfather. And in his own apartment, he created this extraordinary sort of surrealist museum. Most importantly, he spent 3 months hanging and rehanging the show, testing out ideas. He didn't like this, he'd take it all down, he would try something else. He later called the show his great education, because this is something, no curator ever gets to do this, right? When do you get 3 months to just play around? You're always on the deadline. And so the Grandfather show, it was his smallest show, although again, not that small because it is 1,200 objects. And it's a show that he never stopped writing about. When you look collectively at all of his essays, things he wrote, he comes back to this show over and over again. But it was not so well known. There wasn't a book about it. There had not been so many images about it. But in starting to work on this Szeemann project, we discovered that the show was almost intact within the archive. And so we spent a 7-year process on trying to reconstruct this exhibition, because this was one of the, largest, in thinking about how do you do an exhibition about a curator. My great fear, what does one most want to see if they're interested in that curator? Well, they want to see one of their shows, right? Going to an exhibition, an archival exhibition about an exhibition maker, my fear was that people would leave feeling really that they missed it. If you weren't there in 1969, then you really missed it. So I felt that it was crucial in doing these projects if we could actually have a Szeemann exhibition as part of the project. It was not easy to do, though, because unfortunately he did not keep the grandfather objects in one place. This is Szemann's Fabrica, his factory, his space, in Maggia, in Ticino, in the south of Switzerland. Here you can see this is what the archive looked like before it came to the Getty. There are about 9 rooms, full, everywhere. This, you see, he saved all of his luggage tags when he traveled. Here they are in the exhibition in Dusseldorf. So he saved them, we've saved them too. His artist files, he kept files on almost 24,000 individual artists, and they were stretching from room to room to room, just everywhere that you look. So here you can see also a very important library as well. The Szeemann library was not just books that artists were sending him that were just sort of arriving. He very actively collected, and he was really interested in rare books. And so there are incredible books also from the 19th century, early 20th century, that he had acquired, and he acquired things in depth. If he was interested in a figure, he would try to find everything by that person. Here, just some more examples. Things were just everywhere. Even when we thought we had moved things away, then we find everything that was under that, and then under that, and then we started finding things behind the walls. Endless posters. This is the petaphysical portion of the library. He had an incredible collection related to Alfred Jarry and pataphysics. That's a section of the exhibition in Dusseldorf as well. So altogether, about 30,000 volumes in the library, about 600 linear meters of material in the archive. Combined together, the archive was about a linear kilometer of material. In the midst of that, remnants from the grandfather exhibition. So this is that banner in its original incarnation in the exhibition. I'm going to walk you through the exhibition briefly, and then we'll talk about how we brought it back together. So, walking into the apartment, there was a section about the grandfather's early life, which was very interesting. He was born in Hungary when it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the age of 12, he apprenticed to be a hairdresser, and that began his Wanderjahre, where he was traveling. He was in Vienna. He was in what's now the Czech Republic. He was traveling through the Balkans. He was in Germany. He was for a time in Switzerland. He was for several years in Paris. Then he was in London. And in 1904, he moved the family to Berne. Szeemann's father was an infant at that time. And so this section is sort of tracing that early life. It's very strange. Here in the middle, this here is a drying rack for pot lids. It's a little bit of a reference to Marcel Duchamp, I think, and his wine bottle drying rack. This is the first of many references to Duchamp that you'll find in the exhibition. Strangely here, it's also, it's a family tree. It's a map of the wall. So each layer on the drying rack has a label, and then you can compare that to where you are on the wall. So again, I'd never seen that in a show where you put a map of the wall in the middle of the wall as the centerpiece of the wall. An interesting idea. This family tree, it continues around the corner into a little washroom. So here you can see these are photographs of the grandmother going on down. Here you can see, I don't know if you can barely see that, that's Szeemann after his trip to Cuba in 1967. Here, the grandfather got Swiss citizenship in 1919. He made this Swiss flag out of hair that he collected in the salon. It's this amazing object. And this section, two sides of the hallway, were about the grandfather's love of Switzerland and the grandfather's love of Berne. And parallel to that, a section about the grandfather's roots in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A record of his own military service, and all of this memorabilia that he'd collected about World War I, which was of great interest to him, even though he had been living in Switzerland for many years by that time. In the hallways, a section about his early shops in Paris and London and then Berne, and then sections, all of these beautiful diplomas. Hairdressers used to get the most amazing diplomas, and records of conferences he attended, things like that. Opposite, still in the hallway, a section about the grandfather's relationship to money. This section was sort of about how the grandfather did not really understand money. Here we have these copper mine stock certificates that he had bought in London, and then he just sort of kept them decoratively. And then also this wallpaper made of wartime currency, inflationary currency, all of these currencies that then had no value. This was the first time Szeemann had ever made a wallpaper and then hung art on top of it. That's one example of a technique that he then started using later in his career, and it became sort of a hallmark. Here also, this strange section about people the grandfather admired. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You have Wagner, and you have Napoleon, and you have another British general, and you have JFK. Interesting sort of group, mostly musical composers, though. In the living room of Szeemann's apartment, he turned that into a symbolic bedroom for the grandfather. I say a symbolic bedroom. The grandfather's apartment did not look like this. What we're looking at here, these are the grandfather's possessions, but they're not arranged in the manner that the grandfather lived with them. Instead, this is an exhibition that in this section is taking the form of a bedroom. And Szeemann you can think more about his background in theater here. He's making a sort of stage set. He's trying to build a characterization of the grandfather, using these objects. So the grandfather did not sleep under a shrine to Jesus, but he was very religious. And so, he's taking these objects that might have some of that meaning, and he'll condense it onto a wall. So you begin to get a character sketch of the grandfather by looking at these things. The writing desk with some of his prints and collections about travel and learning. The grandmother's dressing table. The incredible wardrobe with their clothing and other little objects that they had collected. So then the third and final part of the exhibition, in a very small room, was called His Contribution to the Triumph of Beauty. And this was the section about the grandfather's career as a hairdresser. This is where we see some of his own hair designs. We see all of these coiffure magazines that he has collected, which Szeemann turns into another wallpaper. Wig stands. The grandfather was also a wig maker. He did a lot of work for opera and theater. We see here all of the beauty tools, the combs, all of which look like torture devices. Szeemann and his grandfather both had a hero named Marcel. For Harald Szeemann, of course, it's Marcel Duchamp. For Etienne Szeemann, it's Marcel, the inventor of the Marcel wave, and one of the great innovators of the curling iron. So we have this little shrine to Marcel in the middle here. Here's the whole shelf. A section about the grandfather's, his little laboratory. He was developing his own line of hair dyes and his own curling, his own hair curlers and other creams, all of these beauty products. And here a section about men's grooming and theater. And then this strangest section of the show, these sort of domestic shelves of the grandfather's possessions still in this room. And in some cases, we're again forming this character sketch of the grandfather. You can see his smoking accessories, etc. But then some things are more strange. And why are they there? Why do we have a modernist display of pliers and a fan motor? The coffee grinder, why is it there? In some ways, the answer to this is in the show that would come next after the grandfather exhibitions, and that is the Bachelor Machines exhibition, this show that was focused on Duchamp and looking at this period of these strange machine creations. So here we have the coffee grinder. Here we have a print of the coffee grinder by Duchamp and his brother Villon that was in the Bachelor Machines exhibition. And the coffee grinder itself was in the Bachelor Machines exhibition. For so long I was wondering, why is there a shelf of light bulbs and light bulb boxes? What can this mean? Because when you look at this show, never in my life have I seen a show that's so involved with the relationship of objects between themselves. So there needs to be a reason. These are Helvetia brand light bulbs. They're wartime blackout bulbs. So they're black. They have just a little pinhole of light at the bottom. So you can just barely have light without it showing through the window. But we also have Picabia's American print. And I think the Helvetia light bulb was a play on the American light bulb, which was also in the Bachelor Machines. We have this mysterious wrapped object. Maybe it's a reference to Christo's wrapped Kunsthalle de Berne, which was one of the most famous projects that Szeemann had done there. It could be a reference to Marcus Retz's sketch of a wrapped Szeemann holding out his hat, trying to raise money. It could be Man Ray's portrait of Isidore Ducasse, which is this wrapped sewing machine, which here we see it in the Bachelor Machines exhibition. Here's the light bulb. We also have a typewriter and a sewing machine, which are also prominent objects in the grandfather show. I think ultimately these grandfather objects are the visual culture that surrounded the development of Dada and Surrealism. And in a way, this is what brought Szeemann to another reason beyond just the family connection that made him so interested in the grandfather. One of the strangest things about the Bachelor Machines exhibition, on the one hand, it's looking at these artworks, it's sometimes looking at popular culture, posters about trains and sculptures and things like that. But most famously, Szeemann commissioned what he called visualizations from literature. because his feeling was that this concept of the bachelor machines, you find it more often in modern literature. The most famous example is this. This is a visualization of the torture machine as described by Franz Kafka in the penal colony. Szeemann designed this model, and then he had it constructed to his specifications. I think that the inspiration was the permanent machine of his grandfather, which was also on display in the show. The permanent machine, it's an amazing object. I mean, you would wrap the hair around these things, and you would spray the chemical, and then you plug it in. And from what Etienne describes in his autobiography, the earliest ones, this is the second version of the machine, but when he was working with the first version of the machine, it would take about 14 hours. And he only did it, I think, 6 times, because every time he did it, all the skin on his hands would fall off. So he eventually was trying to develop more gentle formulas, but the Szeemann permanent has no relation to the permanent you might get today. He never really achieved a gentle enough formula. So there are a little over 1,200 objects. We found about 800 of them in the Szeemann archive. Another 300 of them we found still with the family. And then there were 100 objects missing that I'll talk about in a minute. I wish that Szeemann had kept everything grandfather all in one place. Unfortunately, he did not. They were scattered everywhere. We had to look inside every single box because he'd filed them away thematically, sometimes a bit randomly. I mean, this is the grandfather at the end of his life. That photo was used in this section of the show that had interviews with family members. Sometimes it's decoration. I mean, here we see this banner here, which is here in the grandfather show. With all of Szeemann's postal scales, here's this guy, which was from here. Here we see hats. Here we see furniture. Here's hats in the furniture. This was sort of the easy part, right? These things are right out. The mannequin heads. One of these goes here. There was no checklist for the show. We only had photographs. And we were fortunate there was a young scholar from Portugal who has a master's thesis several years ago, Mariana Teixeira. She has an essay in the catalog. She had gone through the photographs and kind of matched them to the floor plan of the apartment. So that helped us a bit. It gave us a starting point. So here's the apartment. All of these numbers here is showing where the camera was in each of the photographs that exist. This is the space where the exhibition existed. And so if you go to the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf, this is the structure that we've built to reconstruct the exhibition. And we basically just started matching things up. So we would have our photograph. We would go through every object we could find. As we would locate them, we'd start typing them in so that we could just sort of take account of every single object. This was sort of the biggest part of it, of just knowing which image went where. In some cases, it seems easy. Here, this is the only photograph in the world taken of this wall. Seems great, right? It's great. We can tell what everything is. But what's that? What is that? It was hard work, but ultimately we learned You can do pattern matching because there is a finite number of photographs. And so even when you have a blur, you can sort of be looking for the shape of blur that you want. In some cases, it felt like forensic art history in a way. You start learning, that there's the thing that the photograph seems to be, but then there's the other information that's hidden. So this is the only photograph in the world showing what was down here. It was enough. Again, just by pattern matching, you would begin to see. And in some cases, like these beautiful old hairnets, they're so beautiful, I just knew he had to have put them somewhere. There's no way, you start to get a sense of the show and know, there's no way he did not put that in the show. And then here is the evidence. They were there. Just another example, you spend a lot of time looking at this and then realize that this is the best photograph in the world, showing the end down here so that we could tell that there were 3 hairpins, that there was a little bit of hair. Every other photograph existing of this room, it was too blurry. So you start learning to look to the edges and to extract every bit of information from the photograph that you can, because it was all we had. So I worked on this for 7 years. My first conversation with the family was before the Getty even acquired the Szeemann archive. We started talking about the feasibility of trying to reconstruct the grandfather exhibition, because it meant all of a sudden the archive would include all of this furniture, all of these family objects, all these things that you may not normally include with an archive. So the notion of doing this show, it actually, I think, from my very first visit to the Fabrica, it came up the moment I realized what was there. Because the notion that the Szeemann archive might contain a Szeemann exhibition within it was very interesting. And it's very interesting from the perspective of an archive to think that you could preserve an exhibition also. 7 years, 6 years, 10 months, and 2 weeks of that time, I only had these black and white images. And then less than 6 weeks before we started building the show, we discovered color footage. And this was from a Swiss television special from 1974 about the exhibition. And shockingly, it was not in the Szeemann archive. Because normally you just have a feeling that Szeemann has kept absolutely everything, but he did not have this video. We were working with a documentary filmmaker who was producing little short documentaries that are in the Obsessions exhibition. And he went to the Swiss television archives and he found this thing. So for instance, we had no idea the carpet was green. We interviewed everyone we could find who had seen the show. No one could remember that the carpet was green. We didn't know this tablecloth was pink. The tablecloth was one of the things that was missing. So right at the very end, right before construction, we had to do this quick round of changing things around. But even in that, you sort of take the forensic approach. So the most amazing footage is this. Look at that. I'll let you see it again. We could go through frame by frame and we get to see the shelves from all of these different angles. So this image, for instance, is so amazing. I never knew that teacup was red. This is the clearest view in the world of this particular shelf, which was hidden elsewhere. So much detail, right? Enough detail. I'd been wondering where these go, and we were able to figure it out, that was where they went. These objects were not designed to last, and they'd had a hard life in a lot of ways, and so they arrived in a very poor state. And so much of our effort was just cleaning them up and untangling them, trying to figure out what they are. This is our conservator, Melissa Huddleston, just fearlessly diving in and beginning to clean things, to make housing for everything. A lot of the prints and objects had water damage. In some cases, that damage was there in 1974. And in other cases, it was not. And so this was a big question. Okay, we have to clean these things. We have to treat these things and stabilize them. Stabilize them to what point? Do we make them look brand new, or do we make them look as they were in 1974? That was the choice that we made. So we made a form for every object where we could just note what was the condition now, what was the condition in 1974, and then what's the priority to try to treat it. So as an example, here's this photograph. You can see severe water damage. Here it is in the original show. The water damage is not there. So we fix the water damage. Or here's a case, this beautiful little painting where there's this scar, right, going right through her face. Here it is in the show. To my devastation, the scar is there. This would be so easy to fix, but we couldn't fix it. We kept it. Some of these were real problems. This frame, and here it is in the original show. There's no damage on the side. Here it is now. The material of this frame, we have no idea what it even is. It's an unidentified substance. It's almost like formica or something, which is important because we don't have a substance we can paint in here that's going to match this plasticky feeling, and we don't have a substance that has that same sort of sheen. So I think this was one of Melissa's most brilliant ideas. She had the intact end of the frame photographed, matched exactly in color, and then we created like a leaf, almost like a gold leaf, a photographic transfer that we could match on exactly. So here it is being applied, sitting. It's perfect. You can't tell. It's amazing. Going through, we also had to stabilize these as museum objects. And so a lot of these frames are really bad frames for the object. The material is touching the glass, which you would never do today. We just needed to stabilize them. So every single frame had to be completely taken apart, invisibly strengthened, and then put back together. And that's when we started learning. We think Etienne Szeemann was framing these himself. Because a lot of these things are lined with little hair ads for different shampoos and things like that. And so here, this little beauty product is held behind it. This is this sort of military portrait, and then behind we see this shampoo advertisement. Just to give you a sense of what we had to really clean and sort of deal with all of this. This one was amazing. This is a hand-painted sign for Etienne Szeemann's shop, but it had just been used to line the picture. Here, just some basic to show you what just basic cleaning can do for these. We did take one little liberty here, like this little sheet was folded up, and we unfolded it. I think it was folded in the original, but it's just too adorable not to unfold it. In a lot of cases, things using glue, the glue had failed, so it's just a matter of cleaning and reapplying everything. Some of the frames had really had been horrible damage. So here's another case. If you just have one clean section, then you can make a cast and repair it completely. This was the worst frame. But again, you just need one section and you can fix it completely. These beautiful mannequin heads, the wig stands they're called, had a hard life. This one, the eyes are supposed to be closed on this. They're back around the year 2000, a local teenager had broken into the Fabrica on New Year's Eve when the family was away and done a little vandalism, including drawing eyes on the mannequin here. So in permanent magic marker, which is the worst possible substance on earth for a conservator. So this was actually a very lengthy treatment to get that restored, and then also to even out the tone, get it back cleaned up. We'd shipped so many pieces of furniture to Los Angeles, and most of the furniture is original, but every single piece of furniture in this photograph was missing. So this was one of the big philosophical questions. What do you do when an object is missing? If this were an art exhibition, the answer of what to do when the object is missing is almost always nothing. Leave it out, right? Just go with the parts that you know that are original. But for this, what is the bedroom if the beds are gone? I think that the thinking about what Szeemann was trying to achieve with this exhibition, a big part of what he was trying to achieve was simply ambiance, to create the feeling of the grandfather, to give this total impression of an environment. And as you've seen from the images, every single surface is covered from wall to wall. It's as full as an exhibition can be. So if you start removing objects, the holes become glaring. And that's what led us to the notion that we're going to replace everything. So if it's missing, we will find it or we will make it. In many cases, what's missing was a print, prints that were very popular and were really easy to find. In other cases, it took us years to find. And then in some cases, we would make. So this furniture, it's part of a matching set. There are two wardrobes. We had one of them. And so we knew these details of the posts. We knew the exact finish of the wood. We had all of that important information so that we could design the surrogate, send it to a furniture designer. The notion is that they would then finish it a little lighter than what it should be because it's much easier to make the wood darker. So here we have the original. Here is the prop. Here is a scenic artist in Los Angeles, basically a trompe-l'oeil artist who's then matching the finish. So we partnered. I partnered with an art director who primarily works in the film industry. And then she would look at these challenges and she would have the network of artisans who could help us with this. So here we are in the midst of color matching, moving things into the space so we can see it in the light that will be there, and then match them. So you see, this is a matching piece that is original. This matching piece is original. And then we try to match the color. So speaking of these beds, this moment, all these religious artworks, it's of course one of the big focal points of the exhibition. So it also had to be the wall that was missing the most of anywhere and most troublesome. It was missing this painting. It's easy to replace a print. It's almost impossible to replace a painting. And we have not good photos of this painting at all. Here is the wall. This is what we had that was there. And you see they're all falling in a color range. So as I started looking for substitutes, I could sort of drop them in and see if the colors were working or not. But then the big problem was this. For a moment, I had the idea, there are these painting factories in China that specialize in making reproductions of masterpieces. And so I thought, okay, this is great. We'll hire one of them to do this. I sent them the picture, and they said it's impossible. It's not high enough resolution. We don't know the colors, and we don't guess colors. What the people do here is they paint exact matches, and so it wouldn't work. This is a scene, it's a Virgin and Mary with Saint Anne. They said, we could give you other Virgin and Marys with Saint Anne. All right. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. This one almost would have worked. I thought long and hard about this. Finally, we decided on a local solution. So we hired an artist. This is the highest resolution image in the world of that painting. We printed it out on canvas as a photo transfer to scale, to the size that we thought it would be. And then the idea was that she could then paint over it. This is what showed up. I thought I was going to die. It's like early Picasso over here, right? It was like 5 days before the show opened. And, I thought, okay, we have failed. We've worked so hard, and then this will be the centerpiece painting hanging over the bed. The idea all along had been that one artist would paint this, and then there's another artist we would give it to who specializes in aging props. And so I took it over to her and said, okay, what can you do? She said, oh, it's perfect. I thought, there's no way. She's like, no, it's perfect. You don't understand. We'll get the crackle coat on it, and that makes a lot of the problems go away. She's like, you have to understand how perception works in a set. It's more about just not drawing too much attention and fitting in. So we get the crackle coat on it. We get it in the reproduction frame. We get it out of the sunlight. And suddenly it will fit in just fine. And in fact, you look at it next to, so this is an original painting that's elsewhere in the show. They're honestly not so different from each other. So it wasn't as bad as I thought. I mean, I never look at this too long. I just kind of keep going, but it was okay. Other instances of sort of how the methodology, I guess. So here, this is a very important object. This is on the wall about his roots in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and this is this call, basically asking, sort of noting that Austrian and Hungarian men living in Bern had been called to fight in World War I, and they had left behind wives and children. And they were asking for donations to help them. And then it's signed by 6 or 7 people at the bottom. Etienne Szeemann is one of them. And it was a sort of poster. And it was not there. We didn't have it. We're not going to find it again. So here again, we commissioned an artist to paint it from the photograph. And we could sort of tell, we're guessing about the colors, but when you look, you can see that there's a tone, like this has to be red, and you can match that tone and sort of know what was red here, and so she did that. But then she made some mistakes. So, but we weren't going to use the painting. We had to turn it into a poster. So here it is. This is the digital version. We could correct the mistakes that she made, sort of fix the colors. Then we can print it out as a poster. And then we sort of age the mat. And then sort of here it is in the reconstruction. In other cases of digital work, here we have this sort of costume print. We didn't have it. I couldn't find the exact one. This one is really quite close. It was the wrong size, so we were going to have to sort of print it out at another size and then age the paper. And then here's that color television footage we found right before. Here's that print. It's not red. You can't really tell in the projection, but you can in the video tell it's a sort of dark greenish blue. So we were able to sort of clean it up, get the color right, and then here it is installed in the space. So here, the mannequin head spent a lot of time thinking that the head did not exist until we realized that it does exist. It's just got a wig on underneath that wig. She's a redhead. And so, but finally, you can tell by looking at the face and the eyes that it is she. She was in a very poor state. She had, we believe, years and years ago, long before it came to the Getty, a conservation attempt that was not successful. And so and she's made of wax. So it's amazing that she's survived anyway. And her eyelashes are made of human hair. We first had to remove the previous conservation attempt, sort of get that stripped down to the original, and then do end painting to get her back into a good state. And here we're working. This is a wig maker who specializes in opera, and so this wig she was already very familiar with. We had the original boat. We didn't have the wig. So here she is getting her fitting the boat on top. This is when you start with white hair and then you dye it to the sort of blonde shade that you want. But the wig is not, it's blonde underneath, and then you spray white powder on it. But if you just keep it white to begin with, it doesn't look the same. So here we are choosing blonde. And here we are in one version counting the curls, and they weren't right. And here's the sort of before the lace front is trimmed, getting her all set, getting her ready for her little pedestal. And there's her pedestal that we had made, getting it filled out under, getting her ready for the wig, the final fitting of the wig. Here she is in this space. A lot of the other difficulties, we're having to make this all to museum standards. So invisibly, somehow, that boat is firmly attached to that wig, which is firmly attached to that head, which is firmly attached to that base, which is screwed in to this stool, which is bolted into the floor, so that you could trip over this thing and nothing would move. And then there has to be enough hairspray to last it for 2 years, which is the length of the tour. So, and seamlessly if possible. It's hard. Here she is. There she is originally. So the fireplace. Here the fireplace is in the original apartment. Here's one we found. It's a prop. That's the other thing. These things are traveling everywhere. You don't really want like a marble fireplace. You want something that's light. This guy's claim to fame was that it was in a heavy metal video in the 80s. And now it's in the Grossvater show. Here is designing the bricks inside, which are made of styrofoam. And then, again, sort of trompe-l'oeil painting. Here's applying fake ash, which you then brush away. Here it is all installed in the exhibition. The biggest saga was the Chihuahua. And so you see so many of the photos of Leontine Szeemann, the grandmother. She's holding two Chihuahuas. I guess only one of them got taxidermied, but here it is, and it's in the exhibition. This is right at eye level. It's very, very prominent, and it's right next to, hanging on the wall next to it is a little photo shoot of the Chihuahuas. So it's very important. Here it is, close up. We didn't have it. It had not survived. I started looking for them. Would that work? It was this whole Victorian art form. Taxidermies come a long way. I think the anatomy a lot of times is not quite right. Sometimes they would keep them under bell jars. Or they'd make little tableaux. See this one? He's smelling a turtle. Can you see the turtle? We needed this one. A substitute here, it doesn't work. It needs to be this Chihuahua, which is not as easy as it sounds. I didn't know a lot about taxidermy, but you can't just pose the animal. They're on a form, an existing sculptural form, and there's just, this pose. They don't have this pose. That didn't exist. We were going to have to make it. Luckily, this little photo shoot that Szeemann had done with Balthasar Burckhardt, they got the Chihuahua from a few different angles, so we were able to sort of make a determination of the form. Here it is, and this could then be sent to a 3D printer, and so we printed it out. And here it is in the taxidermy studio, starting work on it. She made the harness, and she made the bow. She made everything and aged it. Look how cute. Yeah. Part of the deal was, this taxidermist was so happy to do this, but she did want it to be a little more anatomically correct because it is representing her own work. So I'm happy about that too, because the other one was very creepy looking, I think. Certain details that I never would have thought of became huge. Like the color of thumbtacks, because on this wall there are more than 250 thumbtacks. There are more than 2,000 thumbtacks in this exhibition. This was a double challenge. The first philosophical challenge was, what color should the thumbtacks be? And here's every color of thumbtack that you can get. In the Szeemann archive, we found precisely one. Here it is, that we could use as an example. But these thumbtacks are so prevalent all throughout the show that it actually really mattered, especially the white against this yellowed antique paper. And you can see it already here. Almost every thumbtack, and there are pens too, but that's elsewhere in the show. Almost every brand of thumbtack either skews blue or pink. And that becomes really, really, really visually evident when you have a whole wall of hundreds of them. But then the second issue is that we can't use thumbtacks. These are museum objects now. You can't thumbtack them to the wall. So we also had to make a system where we're just using the top part of the thumbtack. We're sort of having to cut off by hand, and then we put a layer of wax, and then there's a paper-thin magnet. And before it all goes down, you make a grid of screws underneath so that you can sort of attach where each one's going to go. So when you see the show, everything is, whether it looks like it or not, is to a museum standard. So I'll just show you briefly in Los Angeles. my big idea there was that I wanted to build the apartment out like a sculpture, and in particular to have the first impression of it to be the artifice, or to be the absence of the artifice, what's behind the artifice, the notion that this is all constructed. So you could walk around it. Here, for instance, this is the back of the fireplace, so it is all styrofoam. And then it's as you approach that you sort of then see the illusion of the ambiance sort of as you go inside. And then here, just some comparisons. It's not perfect, but I think it's pretty close. I think it may be the most extensive sort of reconstruction of an exhibition that's been attempted to date. Sometimes it was so painful. We found this exact light fixture, and then when it arrived, it was in about 5,000 pieces, and so we had to sort of get a substitute. The colors, of course, are the most shocking, and you don't expect them in the black and white. But I think in most cases, we managed to achieve a pretty close match between the original and the reconstruction. In some cases, we were forced to make changes. So for the picture, this lamp is off because it creates a problem in the photograph when it's on. But we can't, if we turn it this way now, it's casting too much light on the objects behind it. We're also protecting the sort of light exposure that they can receive. So we're making certain little changes here and there. But in general, I think it was a very close result. And then my dream, of course, was it would be even better if we could show it in the original apartment itself. And amazingly, the kind of people who live in that apartment agreed to move out for 4 months. And so over this past summer, we actually had this installed in the apartment itself in Berne. So, with both the Obsessions exhibition and the Grandfather exhibition, each venue that it moves to, we want it to change. So right now in Düsseldorf, the show is rather different than it was in Berne. When it moves to Castello di Rivoli, it will be quite a bit different, stretching out over 15 galleries in the historic castle. This is the apartment building. So the Grandfather show was up here on this floor. So in Los Angeles, you have the sculptural experience. In Berne, you can have actually the experience of sort of walking up the stairs and moving into the space. The biggest thing we can't achieve everywhere else is this sort of staircase going up. So Berne was the only place where you could get this exact arrangement with the stairs, or this selection of material that was hung on the ceiling. We could only have properly in Berne. And the biggest thing, special in Berne was the sunlight coming through. We did have to apply ultraviolet coating so that not too much UV light would be coming in. But having the light coming in from the side, I think, was a very important part of the experience. So this sculptural notion in Los Angeles was very important. In Düsseldorf, we can't achieve that because the apartment is just a little bit wider than the gallery space. So here's the hallway poking out one of the entrances to the space. But luckily they had two. And then also in Düsseldorf, we needed to finish out this side here because we're also using that as a gallery. But I still wanted to acknowledge that kind of artifice in some way, or the fact that this is a construction. So the main way we figured out to do that in Düsseldorf is we staged all of the crates outside the window. So the Obsession show, it's 57 large crates. And that's sort of what you can see outside the Grandfather window there, sort of all of the components that went in to making this. So that's all I have for you, and thank you for taking the time to listen. do we take questions? Is that, yeah, in the back?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation, and I'm really looking forward to see the show. I had first one remark. I'm thinking to two shows on curators. The first one would be the show of Oscar Massota, created by Ana Longoni at MACBA and MUAC in Mexico. And the other one was a fantastic show on Seth Siegelop, created by Sarah Martinetti at the Stedelijk. Exactly.
Yeah.
That have, let's say, common point with what you intend to do. I mean, at least some. The second
there's one other. There was a great exhibition on Walter Zanini at MAC USP in Sao Paulo. Okay. And those are the only three that I know of. Yeah.
The second remark was you really choose to apparently to approach the question of the reconstitution of the show as a set. Did you imagine to do it also as a period room? So without the possibility of the people wandering inside, but just entering in each room, which is a quite different experience. And the third question would be the taboo question: how much the show costs?
I'll answer two of your questions. So in terms of the question of the period room, I really wanted to try to keep this to be a reconstruction of the exhibition as much as possible. But I think that for the visitor, and particularly for the, and not every visitor, in fact, most visitors do not come into these exhibitions knowing a lot about Harald Szeemann. And even if they know a lot about Harald Szeemann, they don't know a lot about the Grandfather Show. And so I think a lot of people have an experience of it as a period room anyway. I know this because I keep meeting people who thought that they were visiting Szeemann's grandfather's apartment, and that it was not a Szeemann exhibition, and that for some reason we'd chosen to make a period room of his grandfather's apartment, and they don't know why. There are wall texts that people could read, and in Germany they do. But I think, I think in Szeemann's case, his background in theater and his first profession before curating was theater. He made his own one-man show where he made the sets and the script and the costumes and starred and directed and produced and advertised. I think that background in theater was crucial, not just for the Grandfather Show, but actually for all of his shows. And I can think even towards the end of his life, I think his most important late essay is an essay called "To Stage is to Love," where he's really talking about this curating as a sort of staging. I think also, looking at the Swiss television special, they're interviewing him, and he talks about how after Documenta 5, when he was in this period where he wasn't working, he started going around to all these other types of museums, history museums, little historical societies, or he writes about visiting Beethoven's birthplace. And, he basically then is encountering this whole other way of curating, right? I mean, there's a curatorial methodology for the history museum. I think the period room falls among that. So I think one of the interesting things about this show is that he's taking from all of those places. He's using the approach you might find in a history museum, but he's also displaying the mannequin head like a Brancusi sculpture. He's mixing that all together. That's part of why this exhibition is so fascinating to me. It is a tribute to his grandfather, but to my mind, this, more than any other exhibition I've seen, is about the notion of curating itself. What happens when you arrange objects in space to create meaning. It doesn't always look like a show because he's using other types of objects. But I think that at the essence, that's what the methodology is. Yes?
I don't speak English. Sorry, do you understand the French?
Not
No.
that well, but Aaron, do you want to translate?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
OK. OK. Je vous remercie pour ça, pour ce que vous avez fait et dit. Et en même temps, je trouve que vous commencez à ressembler un peu à Szeemann. You look a little bit like Szeemann now. Yes. You look like. I knew him very well. But another thing, you said at the beginning that it was different Szeemann. I think, I don't know, because he says he has different periods in his life and different lucky with money. It was difficult at certain period.
Sure, yes, absolutely.
Of his period.
Yeah.
And he always makes something new as a joke, sometimes. His first work with his, how do you say, graduate, sa thèse. Yes, graduate. It was on Alfred Jarry. Yes, you know that. Then I think it was like jokes. And sometimes when it was very difficult for him, life, he looks for jobs because when he was out of Kunsthalle, he made his agency, spiritual agency. With
The Agentur für geistige Gastarbeit, yeah.
Yes.
Agency for spiritual
Yes, with
guest
1 franc.
labor, or, yeah.
1 Swiss franc.
Yeah.
Then I think that it's not, c'est pas linéaire from conceptual art with Heiser, Beuys and thing, and then coming with something more conservative. No.
Oh, not more conservative at all.
Voilà,
No.
c'est ça, oui. If you can say something like that, about that, because...
No, not more conservative. I think when you look at the turn he makes after Documenta 5, where he essentially spends 10 years doing this trilogy of modernist exhibitions, and each of them did have some contemporary work, but by far the focus was modern. No, his intention with those shows, I think, was to re-radicalize that early generation, because they were at a point when I think there was, in the historical distance, they had been overcome, or you wanted to overcome them, or you wanted to stop talking about them, or you had absorbed what you thought the lesson was. And I think that for him, his feeling was no. They're more radical than we imagined, first of all. So I think to uncover the wildness of someone like Duchamp, and particularly someone like Jarry, I mean, I think that was the first part of it. And the second part of it was to relate that then to his own generation. Because I think after all these attacks, which they were attacks on his shows, but I think he saw it as an attack on his generation and what the politics and the sort of social movements of the 1960s had gone through. He wanted to connect them. Each of them, in a way, could ratify the other. I think that was the idea. And I think we see that, again, it's there in the grandfather exhibition. He's connecting himself to the grandfather's generation. So I think no, in a way, these modernist shows are some of the most wild shows that he did. And when I say they're different Szeemanns, I think what I really mean, you can find hints of what he did in the later shows and the earlier shows, but I really think after the grandfather exhibition, there's just a little more confidence because he had tried certain things and he knew that they would work. And it allowed him, A, to be a little more broad in how he mixed things up. And B, I think it allowed him to fully embrace the poetics a little more of the exhibition. And I think that in the earlier exhibitions where he's primarily working with contemporary artists, they may have wound up being poetic. But when attitudes become form, you know, he himself did not have a curatorial poetics that he was striving for. He had certain ideas that this would go here and that would go there, but it all happened a bit as the artists arrived, with a very good result. But, you know, afterwards, he would go into the shows really knowing what he thought he wanted. He still would change it quite often once you're in the space, that happens. But I think he was much more focused on the sort of poetics of space in this later, this mid-career portion of his time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, back here.
This journey, but I can almost cry in the idea that we didn't go to Bern. Imagine that I live 3 hours away by plane. Mm-hmm. But can you tell us the schedule of the show, not to lose the next presentation?
Yes, so you can see the show is now up at the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf. It is so beautiful there. It is so beautiful. I had thought that Bern was going to be the premier venue. And I'm beyond happy with how the show looks in Dusseldorf. So I would say, if you want a guaranteed, venue where it's going to look great, go to Kunsthalle Düsseldorf. It's there until January 20th. It then goes to Castello di Rivoli in Torino. It will be utterly transformed in Torino, and I can't even tell you what it's going to be yet. But if you know this museum, the Castello di Rivoli, it is this old castle, and it's a protected piece of architecture, and most of the rooms have historical murals on them, and so you can't really hang that much on the walls, except for every now and then. And so somehow we have to transform the Obsession show primarily into sculpture, even though it's mostly archives. The grandfather exhibition, there's a set of rooms that were servants' quarters that have white walls, windows in the right place, low ceilings, and the rooms are almost the right size. But it's not exact. So the grandfather exhibition, Dusseldorf is the last time that there will be an exact to the millimeter reconstruction of grandfather. This is it. At Castello di Rivoli, it will be more of an improvisation. And then at Castello di Rivoli, this show will spread out over, the Obsession show will spread out over 15 galleries. So parts that are together now in Dusseldorf will be separated out. We're adding a lot of arte povera sculpture from Szeemann exhibitions. It will almost not even look the same. And then finally, in July, early July of 2019, it will be at the Swiss Institute in New York in a much smaller version,
Thank you.
Forthcoming projects about Szeemann?
Oh, forthcoming.
Yeah, after all this.
Isn't this enough? This is my Szeemann project. I'm not, and I really believe as a curator, and particularly working at a place like the Getty Research Institute, where in addition to doing my own shows, I'm the caretaker of several large archives, many more than just Szeemann. I'm the caretaker of many collections, and I firmly believe, while I may do my own projects about some of these archives, it's a moral imperative to then step back. Let others do their projects. Never be a gatekeeper. So what I would encourage, I want the next Szeemann project to be the person who's so angry about this one and disagrees with everything that I've done and wants to do it differently. I think that would be fantastic. But in terms of myself, I won't do another one. I think it's, you don't want to become associated with these collections in the long term. It's just you do a project and then you do another. But that said, people are coming from all over the world to use this collection, and we are constantly lending from this collection to other exhibitions. I think no one has a Szeemann exhibition in the works right now because they've known this is coming. There is, in addition to these projects, we did produce another book, which is selected writings by Szeemann, translated into English for the first time. Many of his writings are already in French, but we did produce that volume because very little of his writing had ever been translated into English. But beyond that, no. I've got another trick coming next, not this one.
Excuse me, did you have anything to do with the reconstruction of when attitudes became form in Venice?
I did, yeah, I did. As a sort of collaborator, so when that project was happening, the archive had already been acquired. So when Germano got in touch with me, there was no way they could do that reconstruction without our cooperation because all of the material was in the archive. So it's part of the reason why this project took 7 years because we sort of delayed it. We thought that the Fondazione Prada, they were doing the project. We wanted it to succeed. I sort of dropped everything and devoted a year of my life to assisting with that reconstruction, just in the research phase. And then if you saw that show, the ground floor of the Palazzo, I curated that section, which was the more archival materials and videos and things like that. So I worked on that, yeah. Which again, utterly different approach. You could never take the grandfather approach to when attitudes become form. You're not going to make a Richard Serra, right? In this case, because these objects, they're not really artworks. They're, in a way, they're only saved in the archive so that they can be in the grandfather show. It sort of allows this different approach. Back here?
Yeah.
Oh, here, okay.
Thank you very much. I would like to go back to the archive. Like, Roland Barthes said, tell me how do you classify it, I will tell you who you are. Mm-hmm. So what did you learn more about Szeemann, about its way to archive?
Well, we preserve the order in which the archive is because I guess we believe the same thing, right? That the way that something has been organized is going to tell you a lot about the person itself. So some of what I've learned I almost feel is too psychoanalytical to go into without embarrassing Harald. But I think in this case, and I think he knew that this archive was a bit of a public place. People traveled from all over to work in the archive. And because of that, when you're using the archive in the most obvious way that one would, your research will reveal Szeemann exactly as he tells the story of himself. And in fact, what that means is the things that contradict Szeemann's narrative or that might tell a different story or that might have something negative or not as flattering, you're not going to find them the first time. But he could never throw anything away. And so he had to put them somewhere. And so you begin to find this sort of contrapuntal system where there's the place. I think of it almost like Robert Smithson's site and non-site. There's the place and then there's the non-place. that you need to discover, I guess, to find the rest of the story. So for example, when attitudes become form, Szeemann has his very glorious narrative of his leaving the Kunsthalle de Berne. He has a lot of agency in it, and it was his choice. But we also know that there were money problems. We know that people were mad at him over this and that, and a lot of those letters are filed in the archive under the last name of Berne City Council members. So they're not hidden, but who knows the names of all the Berne City Council members in 1969? So they have a place. They belong in that place, but they're not filed with the rest of the exhibition materials. So I think that's one example. I think it says something about him of how he does keep. It's very crafted in a way, and I think that what that's going to mean for scholars that are coming into the Getty, the people who sort of breeze in quickly, might get less out of the archive than the people who really spend more time looking. I think there's one back there.
Hi, thank you for everything. And my question is a bit more sensitive or spiritual, because I felt that this grandfather exhibition is about the spirit, the memory. So my question is, did you felt something special with this object, this old object, and with the memories of this grandfather and the memories of Szeemann? So.
Well, I can give two answers to that. One answer is that I'm not a super spiritual person, but I could list 20 different times that Harry's ghost helped us on this project, because there's no other way to explain it in some cases, things that would happen. I mean, one example would be when the show was happening at the Getty, one of the pieces by Armand Schultes, it's Szeemann's wife, Ingeborg Luscher, who sort of makes the presentations of Armand Schultes. And where we were doing that presentation, we had to use these temporary walls. We weren't able to build the walls. We had to use these pre-existing walls. And the walls, they have this architectural detail that matches the Getty's air conditioning vents. It's really stupid because they're not air conditioning vents. It's a fake wall, and it's very high up. And she looked at them and just said, "What is this bourgeois detail? And can it be removed?" And the answer was no. And she was very upset about this because it was changing the way her wall was going to be. Then we're in construction for the show, and I get this frantic call that the Getty has lost the walls. How does the Getty lose the walls? I mean, they don't lose anything. I mean, they track everything. It's impossible that the Getty could lose the walls, but they lost the walls. And then I get a call 24 hours later saying, "You're never going to believe, we found 2 other walls that we forgot that we had from 15 years ago, and they don't have that architectural detail." And so suddenly Ingeborg got the walls just the way she wanted them. And little things like this would happen over and over again, it seemed, that when things would be going, because with a project like this, so much goes wrong all the time. It's constantly in disaster, until it happens. And then problems would just solve themselves in the right way at the most desperate moments. So maybe that was Harry's ghost. I don't know. But we started talking about it as if it were.
Well, Thank you so much, Glenn Phillips, for this fantastic inquiry, presentation, and trip. Thank you so much. We can continue on a more informal way